On July 1st of this year, I shared a Shabbat lunch and some discussion in Kazimierz, in the Jewish quarter of Krakow in Poland, with Marcel and his wife Maria on their 66th wedding anniversary at the JCC in Krakow. Marcel Zelensky was born into Krakow's thriving Jewish community in September 1934. And by 1941, he and his family were relocated to the ghetto until Marcel was interned in the Plaszow concentration camp just outside of the city. And in October of 1944, he and his father were sent to Auschwitz, where he remained until liberation on January 27th, 1945. 10-year-old Marcel, along with a few other boys who had survived, left the gates of Auschwitz-Birkenau and walked 60 miles to Krakow in search of his family, finding the empty apartment in which his early years had been spent. And then he ended up in an orphanage. 6 months later, he was reunited with his mother, who was the only other survivor in his family. They moved to Montreal and started a new life there. And among other things, Marcel became a very keen amateur cyclist. In 2015, Marcel made that same 60-mile journey of his childhood from Auschwitz-Birkenau to Krakow, not by foot, but on a bicycle, to the JCC in Krakow. And Marcel has done this ride almost every single year since. And now, at almost 90 years old, Marcel rode the first 15 miles of that ride on a tandem with Jonathan Ornstein, the executive director of the Krakow JCC. And that was on the last day of June of this year. And I was riding too. I was one of the 200-plus riders riding with my original study partner from rabbinical school, Rabbi Greg Alexander, who's now a rabbi in Cape Town, South Africa. I rode in memory of our beloved friend Irene Rosenshine, who also survived those horrors. Ride for the Living participants gathered by the gates of hell, Auschwitz-Birkenau, and joined Marcel and Bernard Offen, another survivor well into his 90s, who also rode a bike that day for an opening ceremony in the presence of officials before setting off through the Polish countryside, cheered on by local Poles along the way and arriving in the beautiful city of Krakow and the festive finish at the JCC. This extraordinary experience, about which there is so much more to say and which raised money for the inspiring work of Krakow's JCC, marked the beginning of this past July for me. And on the very last day of that same month, we got to receive our old new Torah from the Czech Memorial Scrolls Trust at Westminster Synagogue in London, which many of you saw in the film just before. And we got to fly back on August the 1st with that Torah scroll. Different as they are, these two epic journeys that framed the month of July for me seem to be part of the same story. Both have deeply impacted me, and I draw incredible lessons of inspiration and courage. I feel incredibly grateful and privileged for these opportunities. Marcel, Bernard, and this Torah scroll are all survivors, all witnesses to horrors and loss, and yet tenacious and brave, continuing to tell their stories across the generations, defying darkness. The mission of the JCC of Krakow is renewal and regeneration of Jewish life in Poland after the destruction. And it has drawn so many Poles, many of them young, who are discovering their Jewishness and learning and growing. Jonathan Ornstein, the executive director, often says, it is no longer Auschwitz, period, but Auschwitz, comma. Because Jewish life didn't end in Poland. The 60-mile bike ride coincides with Ruach, which is a Jewish cultural festival in Krakow that brings thousands of people from all over the world to listen to incredible music in the main square of Kazimierz, the original Jewish quarter, and to also participate in other cultural events. That Friday morning, we got up before dawn to get our buses from Krakow to Auschwitz in biking gear to gather for the ride. We rode the 60 miles, breaking every 15 miles, and we ended up at the JCC at 6 p.m. exactly for some photos and beers and a quick turnaround to get ready for Shabbat with some different options for services. And then at 9 p.m., by which time I could barely keep my eyes open, we went to the JCC Shabbat dinner in the presence of 700 people, including the chief rabbi of Poland, Michael Shudrich, and guests from all over the world sharing an abundant kosher Friday night dinner. I was way too tired to take in the power and the significance of that meal. In 1964, 1,564 Torah scrolls from all over Moravia and Bohemia, former Czechoslovakia, that had been stolen by the Nazis from all over the region and stored in a warehouse in Prague, were purchased and shipped to the Westminster Synagogue in London. Not long afterwards, an ultra-Orthodox, a Haredi sofer, a scribe who spoke Yiddish and very little English, saw a sign for a synagogue, happened to be a liberal synagogue in the heart of London. He knocked on the door and he said in Yiddish, "Ich bin a sofer. I'm a sofer, a scribe. I'm looking for work. Do you have any Torah scrolls that need repairing?" It so happened that the woman who opened the door was a woman called Ruth Schaefer, who happened to speak Yiddish. And she said, "Actually, we have 1,564. Come on in." David Brand was that sofer's name, and he spent the next 27 years of his life working every single day except Shabbat, restoring the scrolls that could be repaired. And the refurbished kosher scrolls were sent to communities all over the world as an act of defiance and resistance. Memorial Scrolls Trust scroll number 335 has been dated to around 1775 from the Pinchas Synagogue in Prague. It survived the Shoah and the communist regime, and it came to London in 1964, and it was one of the first kosher scrolls to be allocated in that same year. It was loaned to Gosforth Hebrew Congregation, an Orthodox community in the northeast of England. When that shul closed down, the Torah found a new home with the United Hebrew Congregation in Newcastle upon Tyne. They downsized, and they returned the Torah scroll to London. And on July 31st, Robert and Sarah Sturtz and I, accompanied by an amazing film crew, headed by Lisa Efris, who's here, received this Torah in London, and we flew with it on United Flight 26. 26 is a really significant number, by the way, to Denver, and we brought it to Bonnet Shalom, where we hope it will be for decades to come. Every single one of our B'nai Mitzvah kids will read from this Torah and will learn its history, and each of them will become part of its story, starting with Morris Schwartz in just a few weeks. A week before Rosh Hashanah, I was in an online conversation with Ned Price, who is a Jewish senior advisor to the State Department, and Ambassador Deborah Lipstadt, the special envoy on global anti-Semitism for the White House. Plenty was shared about the frightening realities that are happening in many parts of the world. But Ambassador Lipstadt, who I have had the honor of knowing for many years, had a very clear message. She said, don't be Jewish because of anti-Semitism. Be Jewish in spite of it. Yes, speak out when you need to speak out, but learn and teach and celebrate this incredible tradition. That, my friends, is why we have this Torah as one of the newest members of our community, so that we can continue to tell these stories, origin stories that help us know who we are, why we're here, and what we are called to do, honoring legacies of the past so that we can dream of a vibrant future. Reading from a Torah that is a Holocaust survivor and riding a bike from Auschwitz to a reborn Jewish life in Krakow with 2 survivors, both feel like acts of resistance. Not because of the cruelty and the hatred of the past, but because of the possibility of the future and the tenacity of survival. On Simchat Torah in a couple of weeks, when we end and immediately begin again our Torah reading cycle, we're going to dance and we're going to celebrate the Torah. And we'll be dancing with our Pinchas, old new Torah, in its new home as we honor Robert and Sarah Sturtz as our Chatan Torah and our Kalat Bereshit as the bride and groom of the Torah and of Genesis, who helped us bring MST number 335 to Boulder. Soon we're going to begin our first vidui, the first confessional prayer that is at the heart of this Yom Kippur, this amazing, dare I say, awesome day. I feel like adding an extra al-chet, an extra confessional prayer for myself and for all of us. Al-chet shechatanu lefanecha, for the transgression that we have committed before you, of dismissing, demeaning, forgetting, and disparaging our beautiful Jewish heritage because of the pain of the past. The Torah portion of Ki Tavo that we read a few weeks ago from the book of Deuteronomy opens with an act of ritual storytelling where the Israelites celebrate their first fruits in the land, presenting them in a special basket with a declaration of the past, the origin story, to enrich the blessings and the gratitude of the present and the future, an appreciation of where we come from to inform who we are now. That's not something that AI can achieve. That is a profoundly human experience, an appreciation of where we've come from, so we know who we are in the present and who we're going to be in the future. Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, on that same Torah reading, quotes Winston Churchill, who just happens to have died on the same day that I was born, by the way, which is why my middle name is Winston. Did you know that? It's true. Fun fact. Anyway, Jonathan Sacks quotes Winston Churchill as saying, the longer you can look back, the further you can see forward. The longer you can look back, the further you can see forward. Rabbi Sacks adds, those who tell the story of their past have already begun to build their children's future. Those who tell the story of the past have already begun to build their children's future. Thanks to the incredible interim leadership of Rabbi Chana Rosenholtz and Gali Bey and the Education Committee, we have almost 90 beautiful children in our Hebrew school, excited to learn and grow in our community that is bursting at the seams with the values, practices, and traditions of the Torah at the heart of their learning. We all know what trouble the world is in right now. And for the sake of our old new Torah and the many generations who have read from it and the stories that this Torah would tell if it could speak, for these stories and for the stories of Marcel and Bernard and other survivors. Let's build a vibrant, engaged future for the children of this community and for the world as proud Jews, heirs to a magnificent tradition. Shana Tova.